Hey guys, so I want to answer a question that I've heard asked a lot, and that is why is there a BET, a black entertainment television, but not a white entertainment television? So before I answer this, I just want to kind of make 2 points. The first point is I am answering this question from the perspective of a black American, as an American is living in the United States of America. So the things I'm going to say, my viewpoints, they're not going to be the same, or may not be the same as, for example, a black person living in Canada or a black person living in the UK, and I just want to acknowledge that. And in fact, I can't speak for all black people, so there are plenty of black people who may not agree with this. And the second thing I want to say, the second point before I answer the question is, I don't think most of the time this question is really asked in good faith, but I'm going to address it as if it is. Okay. So why is there a black entertainment television and not a white entertainment television? And the simple answer to that is there is a white entertainment television, and it's called NBC, CBS, and ABC. Okay. So that seems kind of incendiary because you can go on those stations and you're like, there's plenty of black shows. Well, let's look at it from an historical perspective, and not just in the past 20 years, but in the frame of, let's say, since the advent of television, right? And I'll just use an example which is very clear and very easy to look at: MTV. So if you look at MTV debuted in August 1st of 1981, and the first black artist that they had on their network was Michael Jackson with Billie Jean in 1983. So it was almost 2 years because I think Billie Jean, I know it debuted, or at least it dropped. I think the video or the album, the single, excuse me, I think debuted January 1st. So it was almost 2 years before MTV had a black musician. And if you're thinking, well, where were the black musicians? Plus, trust me, there were plenty of black musicians. Prince was huge. Whitney Houston was huge. But just to make the comparison, the first video that MTV showed was by a group, and everybody knows this fact, was the Boggles with Video Killed the Radio Star. Even though it is kind of like an appropriate video to debut music television, I can assure you that there were plenty of black musicians who could rise to the level of the Boggles. So that's basically it. Through most of entertainment, just like the world at large, white has kind of been the standard, the norm, and has often been kind of by definition exclusionary. So to kind of to kind of illustrate this let's kind of think of something. If I were to tell you, look over there, that's a white store, the thing that immediately comes to your mind is it's not so much they're going to be like selling Stetson hats, or Friends DVDs. It's going to be a store where if you're not white, you shouldn't go in it. That's probably what most people are going to think. But if I said, look over there, that's a black store, immediately you're thinking they're going to be selling certain things, right? So that kind of brings me to another point of BET, or black entertainment television, or just black entertainment in general, doesn't have the same exclusionary nature as white entertainment. Now, I'm not saying that I'm not even saying most white people are exclusionary. I'm just saying as it's defined. Because if you look at black entertainment television, it's really just saying, here is a type of music, here's a type of aesthetic that's going to be associated with most black Americans. Because there's a long history of white musicians and white entertainers basically playing essentially black music and black people embracing them. I mean, everyone from Lisa Marie to Dan Hartman to, I think it's Lisa Stansfield, who is a white British lady. There's a joke that everybody thought that Bobby Caldwell was black, and then when people found that he was white, it wasn't like, oh my God, we can't listen to him. It was like, oh, good. What you won't do to do for love. You tried everything, but you don't give up. Even now, if you have white musicians or non-black musicians, performing a certain type of music and a style, I'm not saying that everybody's embracing or whatever. There is a hill, but there is you come correct, you will be respected. The thing that sticks out of my mind is years ago when NSYNC they were doing the tour for their last album. I want to say it may have been No Strings Attached, and it was largely kind of a traditional R&B album, and they were on BET because that's the type of music they were doing. So even within that, this even goes back decades with Soul Train. I think Dan Hartman. I know for a fact Dan Hartman was on Soul Train. I think Bobby Caldwell was on Soul Train. And a lot of these white musicians, I found out about them by listening to R&B stations, basically black radio stations. So when people ask that question, I mean, there's your answer. It's the norm. And not saying that these television, stations like CBS, ABC, and NBC weren't having black talent on there. I mean, there was a slew of great black programming that came out in the 70s, but but even after that, there were barriers of entry. I mean, MTV is like, the solid example. And then even after MTV allowed Michael Jackson on their station, there was still kind of, and he was a mainstay, there was still kind of an exclusion of black musicians. And the funny thing about that is that at this point in the early 80s, there was a new form of music bubbling, coming to the mainstream. And MTV was so slow to jump on it that MTV Raps debuted, I think, in 1988, but you had basically 10 years of hip hop being formed, and because of MTV's exclusionary practices, they were missing out on it. So short answer, yeah, there's always been a white entertainment television. It's just that they don't call it that because since white's kind of the norm, that's just, there's no need to do that. And if you want to say, well, you're a racist for saying that in your feelings, well, okay. In that case, you're kind of in denial, and you need to basically just kind of sit back and think about these things. But like I said, not saying that they were this completely exclusionary, but there was there was kind of a keeping these forms, keeping this out of our spaces, I'll say, discrimination. Anyway, thank you.
I'd like to ask you something. All right. It occurred to me, having watched MTV over the last few months, that it's a solid enterprise and it's got a lot going for it. I'm just floored by the fact that there's so few black artists featured on it. Why is that?
I think that we're trying to move in that direction. We want to play artists that seem to be doing music that fits into what we want to play for MTV. The company is thinking in terms of narrow casting.
That's evident. It's evident in the fact that the only few black artists that one does see are on about 2:30 in the morning or to around 6. Very few are featured predominantly during the day.
No, that's a...
I'll say that over the last couple of weeks these things have been changing, but it's a slow process.
I know, it's funny, I think people have different perceptions. When you wind up watching, let's say you watch an hour or 2 or even 3 a day, people somehow come away with different ideas about what we are doing. We don't have any kind of day parting for anything, let alone a black artist day parted out of what would be, quote, prime time. We don't have that.
Because one sees a lot there's one black station on television that I keep picking up. I'm not sure which station it's on, but there seem to be a lot of black artists making very good videos that I'm surprised aren't used on MTV.